poor because of lack of effort or because of they are unlucky. And the more the citizens in a country think that the reason of poverty has to do with individual lack of effort, the lower the level of social spending in that country. So this graph has been used by many economists to support the idea that one of the main reasons why the levels of redistribution differ across country has to do with the level with the level of So I have tried, so what motivates my study is really to compare the tolerance of inequality, so how much inequality people are willing to accept in their societies, and to do that I followed an experimental approach. So in experiments, so maybe you have heard that the recent Nobel Prize winners in economics are Abhinjit Banjari, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer, and they also apply experimental techniques, though slightly different. But the main idea of an experiment is that people are invited to a research session. They are asked to make a choice with some money. So a choice typically involves allocating a sum of money among different options. And typically we can interpret some of these options as, for instance, more or less selfish or more or less altruistic. So in our experiments, people will be asked to make decisions on how to divide money from rich to poor people within the experimental session. And then people are matched with other people, so people make decisions together, and in the end people receive the money. They really take home the money corresponding to the choices that they made and the choices that other people in their group made. So many people now think that experiments have an advantage over surveys, because in surveys it's too easy to say that the people are willing to do good things for others. So with experiments we can really see if people are also prepared to do good things for others when they have to waste some money to do good things for others. So today I'm going to talk about two different experiments, one in Western industrialized societies, Hello? Yes. Yes. Uh, yes, yes, sure. Sure. Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Gianluca Grimalda. I'm a researcher at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy in Germany. And today I'm going to talk about inequality. So I'm going to talk about the tolerance of inequality in some Western countries, the US, Italy, Germany, and Norway, and in Papua New Guinea. I thank very much Marina Ryzhkova for the invitation to deliver this talk over the web. It's the first time that I deliver a talk through the web, so I hope everything works okay and you can hear me well. So in this presentation I'm going to use some slides that I have prepared here. I hope you can see this pointer, this arrow. This will help me show what I'm talking about. Hello? Can I start? Yes, can I start? Okay. Yes? Good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gianluca Grimalda. I'm a researcher at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy in Germany. And I am very glad to be here through the web, through live stream. I thank very much Marina Ryzhkova for having invited me to this conference. It's the first time that I participate in a conference through live stream, so I hope you can hear me well. I hope you can understand me well. And I'm going to talk about income inequality. So I'm going to talk about income inequality in some Western countries and in Papua New Guinea. I thank very much Marina for having helped me in translating the slides of my presentation into Russian. So you will see that the slides are both in English and in Russian, so I hope that this will make it easier for you to understand my presentation. So I think my presentation will last about 1 hour, and then there will be some space, some time for some questions at the end. So I think we are now ready to start with the slides. So I'll let the technician start the slides. Okay, so I think I can open my slides now, and I hope you can see my presentation on your screen now. Okay, one moment still. Okay. Good. So I will start now. So as I said, the title of my presentation is Income Inequality and Preferences for Redistribution, Experimental Evidence from Norway, Germany, Italy, the US, and Papua New Guinea. So the main question of my research starts from the observation that there are widely different levels of inequality around the world. So here in this photo you can see a photograph from Brazil, where you can see side by side live very rich people and very poor people. Then in other countries like Finland, you can see instead the houses are really look the same to one another. So we observe that there are very different levels of inequality around the world. And so the key research question of my talk is what levels of inequality will people living in different societies tolerate? So these two photos are taken from the US, from Western societies. So some years ago, after the 2008 recession, there was this movement called Occupy Wall Street, who really was protesting against the rich people earning too much money. So the main slogan, the main communication of these people was, we are the 99%. So they meant we are the 99 poorest people in the society, and we don't like that the 1% richest people in the society earn too much money. So this movement seemed to gather a lot of support, but then it kind of disappeared after the end of the financial crisis and of the economic recession. And here in this graph, I wanted to show you some historical data on the evolution of inequality in different societies, in different countries. So here on the vertical axis, we have the Gini index. So the Gini index is one of the most widely used measures of income inequality in a country. So just to give you an idea what the Gini index is, so suppose that in a society there is one person who earns all the money and all the other people earn nothing. So one person has all the money and all the other people have nothing. In this case, the Gini index will be equal to 100. So this is the most unequal situation possible. And then suppose that in a society, everyone has the same income, everyone earns the same. Then the Gini index will be equal to 0. So the higher the Gini index, the closer the society is to a situation where one person alone has all the money. So the idea of the Gini index is that the higher the Gini index, the higher the level of inequality in the country. And here you can see that for the US, the level of inequality was quite high in 1929, and then it decreased up to 1970s, and then from 1970s on it started increasing again. Okay, and now it has reached nearly the same level as at the beginning of the period. So you can see then in continental Europe, so some countries like Italy, France, Germany, and the Netherlands have more or less the same evolution of income, the same change over time of income. You can notice that here the level of inequality is lower than in the US, but again you can see that inequality decreased, and then at the beginning of the 90s it increased again. So many economists talk about the big U-turn, the big change in income inequality around the 70s or the 80s. Here in this graph you can look at Nordic countries. Here Sweden, Norway, and Finland. The level of inequality is very low. It's probably the lowest in the world. But you can see again this same pattern. So inequality decreases and then it goes up again. And then finally in this last graph in the bottom right hand side of this page, we can see the evolution of inequality in some non-Western countries, and I think here the case of China is particularly interesting. So China had low levels of inequality, and then again in the 70s inequality started to increase, and now China has more or less the same level of inequality as the US. So there has been a massive increase of inequality in China. So I wanted to show some data of Russia, for Russia. I didn't find exactly comparable data, but I think you can have a good idea of the evolution of inequality in Russia, and probably you already know. So these data are taken from a working paper by Novokmet, Piketty, and Zuckman. Some of you might know Thomas Piketty. He's one of the most famous economists in Europe and in the United States to study income inequality. And this graph shows again the Gini index on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis we have the years. Here there are 3 different levels of the Gini index. I'm not going to enter into the detail, but yeah, you can see, as you could imagine, that inequality was relatively low, actually was very low, until the collapse of the communist regime. And then from the 1990s, inequality starts to rise very much. And the Gini index reaches levels comparable to the levels of inequality in the United States. Here we have another graph showing another measure of income inequality. So this measure is the concentration of income in the 10% richest people in a country. So on the vertical axis here, you have the amount of income that is owned by the 10% richest people in a country. And this graph, I think, is interesting because it shows a really long-term evolution of income inequality. So you can see that in 1905, level of concentration of income was around 47% in Russia. And then, as you can expect, after the Bolshevik Revolution, it went down considerably. It went down to 23%, at a much lower levels than what we would observe in US and France. And then it was more or less constant. And then, again, as you can expect, from the 1990s, the level of inequality increases. So the level of concentration of income increases dramatically. And now you can see in Russia the concentration of income in the hands of the top 10% richest people in the country is similar to the level that we have in the US, and much higher than the level that we have in France, for instance. So the conclusion here is that inequality today in Russia is comparable to the levels that we have in the USA. This is another graph that I want to show you to give you a little bit a general impression, general picture of inequality around the world. So this graph comes from a study by Osberg and Smeding, 2006. Here on the horizontal axis, we have a measure of the real inequality in a country. So how much inequality, again, measured by the Gini index there is. On the vertical axis, we have a measure of the tolerated, how much inequality people like to have in their own country. Okay? And this graph shows a clear positive correlation between the real inequality and the tolerated inequality. So this means that the higher the inequality in a country, the higher also the level of acceptance of inequality in that country. So here we don't know what is the causality. It could be that in more unequal countries, people get used to inequality and so they come to accept inequality. Or it could be that if people accept inequality, then inequality can increase. We don't know what the causation is. But here what I wanted to show you is the case of Russia. So you can see that Russia is quite far away from this line. So in statistical terms, Russia is a little bit of an outlier. So a country that is different from the others. And why is Russia different? Because there is a big gap between the estimated level of ethical inequality and the inequality that we actually observe. So basically what this means is that in comparison with other countries, the level of real inequality in Russia is much higher than the level of inequality that people are willing to accept. Okay, so this could suggest that people in Russia have not get used to the very high levels of inequality. They have not got used to the rise of inequality that we observed in the last years, and so they would prefer a lower level of inequality than what is in their society. So don't get me wrong, in every country inequality is higher than what people would like, but this is particularly the case in Russia. So I think it would be very interesting to come to Russia and to do my research in Russia, but yeah, I haven't done it yet, maybe in the future. So this is another graph, the last graph of this presentation, and sorry, of this introduction. So in this graph we have another, so this graph shows another very important aspect of inequality. So according to some economists, the reason why the levels of inequality are so different across different countries has to do with the fact that people have a different ideology, or better, people have different opinions on how mobile their society is. Or in other words, people have different opinions on how much it is possible for a person who is poor to become rich, and how much it is possible that a rich person becomes poor. So this is called economic mobility. Okay. So on the horizontal axis here, we have the percentage of people who, in a survey conducted quite a lot of time ago in the 1990s. So here on the horizontal axis, we have the percentage of people in different countries who say that the main reason why poor people are poor is that they don't work hard enough. Okay. And the alternative was that poor people are poor because they have been unlucky, because they didn't have opportunities. On the vertical axis, we have the amount of social spending as a percent of GDP. So again, you can see here that there is a positive relationship. Here you can see that in the United States, for instance, there are relatively few people who say that poor people are poor because they have been unlucky. So in the United States, many people believe that poor people are poor because they didn't work hard enough. And then in countries like the United States, where people have this belief, the level of social spending, which is in a way a measure of redistribution, level of social spending is low. Instead, in countries like Denmark, for instance, where many people believe that poor people are poor because they have been unlucky, the level of social spending is much higher. Okay, so economists have used this graph to support the idea that if in a society people believe that poor people have opportunities to become rich, then there is not much need to redistribute from the rich to the poor, because the poor had enough opportunities to become rich. Okay, so this is an argument that has received a lot of attention in economics. And we will test this in the experiments that I will present too. Okay. So yes, so this is the main message of this graph in Russian. So the more citizens believe that hard work, hard effort, rather than luck determines income, the less social spending in that country. Okay, so this was the introduction. And so this gives you the general picture of inequality in different countries. And now I want to talk more specifically about my research. So as I said before, the main research question is what is the tolerance of inequality in different countries? So how much inequality people are prepared to accept in different countries. And also another related research question is what is the reward of individual merit? So if we see that a person has worked more than another person or is better than another person in a certain task, how much more money are we willing to give to this person who is better than another person? So the focus of my research is on redistribution, so transfer of money from the rich to the poor. So this is what is the main topic of my research. So in other words, how much money are the rich willing to give to the poor, and how much money do the poor demand from the rich? And then we ask what are the motivations of people when making these decisions about redistribution. Are people selfish? Are people averse? Do people not like income inequality? What is the role of risk? Maybe people who are against the risk, who don't like risk, like more redistribution. And what is the role of social norms? And throughout my research, I use experimental methodology. So I will, what is an experiment? So you might have heard that the Nobel Prize winners just nominated in 2019 are 3 economists who use experiments in their research too. So in an experiment, typically participants are called to come to a research session, and then participants are asked to play a simple game. So they are explained the rules of this simple game. In this game, they make decisions with other people. Normally, they don't see other people, so they don't know who they are making their decisions with. And normally in experiments, the game involves allocating money among different options. And typically, the money is provided by the researchers, and typically one option can be seen as more or less selfish or altruistic behavior. So this will be the case in our experiment. What is important, at the end of the experiment, the people are paid according to the outcomes of the game. So participants are paid according to their decisions and the decisions of the other people they've been interacting with. So many people think that experiments are better than surveys because in surveys, people don't have real incentives to answer the truth. So in surveys, if you ask people, do you think, would you like to help the poor? Many people might answer yes. But with the experiment, we can really see if people are willing to help the poor when they have to spend some money to do that. So we can really see if this altruism is consistent with really monetary incentives. So I'm now going to present 2 studies. So the first study was conducted in the US, Italy, Germany, and Norway. And the second study was conducted in Papua New Guinea. So the experimental design of study 1 is as follows. There are 21 participants in each session. And each participant is assigned some money at the beginning, some initial earnings. We used 4 different methods, 4 different ways to assign money. and I will show this in a moment. Then every participant is asked to propose a tax rate to be applied to the whole group. Okay, so a tax rate takes money from the rich within the experiment, not rich in real life, rich within the experiment, and transfer this money to the poor people within the experiment. Okay, so this tax rate works like a tax rate in real life. It takes money from the rich and it gives money to the poor. Then one tax rate among the 21 is randomly selected and applied to the earnings of everyone. Okay, so this is the game. It's very simple, I would say. So we use the 4 different methods, as I said, to determine the earnings. So 2 methods, A and B, emphasize individual merit. Okay, so 2 methods emphasize how much people are good in some tasks, in some activities, whereas the other 2 methods emphasize just luck. Okay. So in the effort treatment, what we call the effort treatment, was as follows. So people had to report which letter was to be found at the page 1, line 3, column 3. So for instance, page 1, line 3, column 3 would be letter O. Okay, so this is a very, I would say, stupid task, very boring task, but this is exactly what people in real life have to do to get a living, to make a living in their life. Okay, so this method emphasized really effort, individual effort, hard work. Whereas another method was this is what we call the ability treatment. This other method emphasized the ability to solve questions of deductive reasons, okay, like an IQ test. Okay, so these 2 methods were used in what we call the merit treatment. Okay, and then in the other 2 methods, these 2 other methods involved a random allocation of money. It was unbiased in one case and biased in another case. I don't have time now to go into the details. Okay, so the key idea here again is that according to the luck method, the initial earnings were assigned according to luck in a certain activity, whereas in the effort treatment, in the merit treatment, the initial earnings were assigned according to individual effort or individual ability, so individual performance in a task. And this is what the people had to do in the experiment. So people were assigned initial earnings. Okay, so there were 21 people, and each person was assigned 1 level of initial earnings from 1 to 21. Okay, so this 1 means that the person received initially more or less the equivalent of €1.30, whereas the person receiving 21 tokens, this person would receive the equivalent of €40. So there was a substantial amount of inequality within the experiment. And then people had to propose different tax rates. So here this graph reports different levels of this tax rate. So if the tax rate was equal to 0%, this is this blue line. So then there is no taxation and no redistribution. So this means that the final earnings that are reported here on the vertical axis are equal to the initial earnings. Okay. At the other extreme, people could choose a tax rate equal to 100%. If people chose level of redistribution equal to 100%, then this purple line would apply. So in this case, everyone would go home with 11 tokens. Okay, so here redistribution would be maximal. All the money from the rich would be transferred to the poor, so that at the end everyone goes home with the same amount of money. And then all the possible other tax rates were also possible. So tax rate of 1, 2, 25, 50, 75%. So people could choose any tax rate from 0 up to 100. Okay, so this is our measure of preference for redistribution. Okay, so in the experiment we actually had 4 decisions. Here in this presentation I'm only going to talk about the last decision. So in the last decision people knew the level of initial earnings. So people knew if they were rich or poor. So this makes very easy to predict what selfish people should do. Okay, so if you are richer than 11 tokens, then you should demand 0% tax rate if you want to make a lot of money. Okay, so if you want to maximize your final earnings, then if you have above 11 tokens, then you should demand 0%. Okay, this is implicit in the redistribution, in the rules of this game. Okay, instead, if you are relatively poor, so if your initial earnings are below 11 tokens, then you should demand full redistribution if you want to maximize your earnings. Okay, so the research was conducted in 7 different locations. So we used 2 locations in the US, 2 locations in Italy, 2 locations in Germany, and only 1 location in Norway. Okay, the reason we had 2 locations in Germany, Italy, and the US is that we wanted to see cultural differences within the country. Okay, whereas in Norway is a country with a relatively little population, then we thought that the culture is much more homogeneous in Norway compared to the other countries. So in each country, apart from Norway, we went to 2 different places with different cultures. Okay, so everybody in Italy would say that the people from the north have a different culture than people from the south. The same in Germany and the same in the United States with respect to West Coast and Southeast. Southeast is very conservative in the US, and Northwest is very progressive in the US. And here are the results. So here are the histograms. Okay, so here on the horizontal axis you have all the possible choices from 0 to 100. And on the vertical axis, you have the frequency, you have the percentage of people who chose a certain tax rate. And here you can see that in all countries, so these histograms show the level of, so the histogram for rich people, for people who earned more than 11 tokens in the experiment. So you can see that many people choose 0%. Okay, so about 40% of people in the US, about 38 in Italy, 33 and 40% in Norway choose 0%. So these are the people who choose according to self-interest. Okay, but then all the others are at least in part, so the remaining 60% are at least in part motivated by something that is not self-interest. Okay, so these other people who demand tax rate higher than 0%, so these are rich people who like to give something to the poor people. And you can see there are also some people, about maybe 10% in Italy, who want 100%. So these people these rich people want to give everything to, not everything, but they want that everyone goes home with the same money. Okay, so this is the histograms for the high earners. And now I'm going to show you the histogram for the low earners, for the poor in the experiment. And here you can see that the graph is symmetric. Okay, so here you can see that many people demand 100%. So many people act according to self-interest. But here you can see that there is quite a big difference between US and Italy. So in US and Italy, less than 40% of the people demand 100% redistribution. But this percentage is much higher in Germany and Norway. So in Norway, 50% of poor people demand 100%, and in Norway, more than 60% of the people demand full equalization, demand that incomes are the same. Okay, so we can see that the number of what we call selfish egalitarians. So these are poor people who are egalitarians. So they want everyone to go home with the same amount of money, but they do this in their own self-interest, at least in part. Okay, so this is the general impression of this decision, and now I want to test some hypotheses. Okay, so first of all, I want to test this hypothesis regarding individual merit. So do people redistribute more when income is determined by luck rather than by merit? Well, this is the case in Italy. Okay, and also in Germany. Okay, so the p-value here is 1% for Italy and 6% for Germany. So it is significant. So people do demand more redistribution when income is determined by luck than by individual merit. Okay, so this kind of makes sense. It is consistent with the graph I showed you before. That graph showed that if people believe that somebody has had some merit in the determination of income, then this person should also receive more money. But this happens in Italy and in Germany. It doesn't happen in the US and in Norway. And it is surprising that it doesn't happen in the US, because many people would say that as a part of the US ideology, many people in the US like to reward individual merit. Okay? Instead, we don't find evidence of this in the US. We find it in other countries, but not in the US. Okay, so this is another graph. So this graph shows the behavior of the poor people in the experiment and of the rich people in the experiment in the merit treatments and in the luck treatments. And here what is interesting is the following, that if we compare the behavior of the rich people in the 4 countries, there is no difference across countries. Okay, so we run a statistical test. So this is the test for the luck treatment. So this test is insignificant. It means that the amount of redistribution demanded by the rich is the same in the luck treatment. It is also the same in the merit treatment. So basically there is no difference in the behavior of the rich people in the experiment. But there are big differences in the behavior of the poor people in the experiment. Okay, so here we can see that, for instance, in the merit treatment, in particular, Italian people demand much less than others. So poor people in Italy are willing to let the rich people earn much more money than what we observe in Germany and Norway. Okay, so in Germany and Norway, as we also saw before, so close to 50% of the people, or exactly 50% of the people, demand 100% redistribution. when they are poor in the merit treatment. Instead, in Italy, this percentage goes down to less than 30%. Okay, so this difference is strongly significant at the 1% level. And also you can see that the US is a country where there is relatively little demand for redistribution by the poor. And then we can see that in the lack treatments there are also substantial differences in the behavior of the poor people. So now it's people living in the US who demand considerably less money than people living in Germany and Norway. So you can see that the graph for Germany and Norway is more or less similar to the graph before. So again, so the median level, so 50% of Norwegian poor people in the experiment demand 100% redistribution. They don't leave anything to the rich. And in Germany, it's only little less than this level. In Italy, the median level is around 78%, but it's in the US that is very, very low. You can see it's lower than 40%. Okay, and what is interesting is that there is no difference, no statistical difference between the US and Italy, as you can see in this table here. There is no difference between Germany and Norway, but there are always a significant difference between US and Italy on the one hand and Germany and Norway on the other hand. And this is a pattern that emerges not only in this last decision, but also in the other decisions that we made. Okay, so it really seems that there are two different blocks of people. US and Italy are more, we say, libertarians, so people in US and Italy are more inclined to accept inequality, whereas Norway and Germany are more egalitarian. So people want to have more equality in these two countries than in the other two. So now this is a result of a regression that, again, not just in the last decision, but in all the four decisions of the experiment, that tries to understand what is the role of other motivations. And these expected or actual earnings, so this is a measure of self-interest, that we have already seen that the self-interest matters. So the more an individual earns, the lower the level of redistribution. But you can see that there are also many other motivations. So for instance, risk aversion is also important. So the more people are scared of risk, the more redistribution they will demand. Okay? Yes. This makes more sense in the other three decisions that I didn't explain, but the idea is that if you don't know about your income, then you could decide to select a tax rate that is high. So if you will end up poor, then you will have a redistribution to your advantage. Okay, so that's the reason why risk aversion is important. Then we have that the political orientation also matters. So people who say that they are right-wing in the experiment, in the post-experimental questionnaire, are also people who in the experiment demand less redistribution, and on the contrary, people who are more inclined to vote left parties in elections, they demand lower redistribution in the experiment. Then we can also see that this control scale is the extent to which an individual believes that economic success is under his or her control. Okay, so this is a measure of social mobility, how much mobility an individual think that there is in the population. Okay, and we can say that there is some evidence. supporting this conjecture, although this only is not really in every decision that we studied, only in some. But for instance, in the last decision for low earners, it is a very strong determinant of redistribution. Other psychological motivations also matter. So if you are self-confident, so if you believe that you are good, then you demand less redistribution. Okay, so to summarize the results, so we can say that we found differences across countries in preferences for redistribution. So US and Italians are more libertarian, and Norwegians and Germans are more egalitarian. Okay, so this means that the people in different countries are quite different from one another, and therefore the things that happen in one country are not necessarily good for another country. Okay, I have hurry up because I only have 13 minutes left. Okay, so it's also interesting that the rich behave in the same way across countries. So this suggests that it's really the acceptance by the poor people in a society that really determines these differences. And we also saw that many individual characteristics also matter for preferences for redistribution. And finally, we didn't find evidence that individual merit was important in the US. Okay, now I started to summarize briefly the second study from Papua New Guinea. So I went 3 times to this small island called Bougainville Island, part of the Solomon Island archipelagos in Papua New Guinea. So why do we go there? Because these are traditional societies. As you will see in a moment, these are very poor societies, and these societies are regulated. They follow behaviors and institutions that are traditional, that are typical of ancient societies. So in many villages where we went to, basically there is no police, there is no government, so people really live in similar conditions to the ancient past. And why is this important? Because many people, many psychologists would say that the way our psychology works is really determined in these societies. So going to these societies is a way to study the basic motivations inside our brains. Yes. So in these societies we use the same design as before, but so the same game as before, but instead of having 21 people, we only had 2 people. So 1 rich and 1 poor. Okay. And yes, okay. So and what we wanted to study also is the effect of proximity to the market town. Okay, so you will see some photos in a moment. So the market town is the place where so is the largest place in the island. So it's the place where there is really a big market, a large market where people exchange food every day. But it's also the village where there are many Chinese shops, where there is an airport, where there are missions from the United Nations, from the Red Cross. So it's a little bit like going to a very big globalized place for these people. So here we wanted to study whether villages that are close to market town, maybe people living close to market town, they become more selfish because typically in market people are learn to be to be treated more maybe according to their individual merit. Okay, so this is what we wanted to test. Okay, so in this fieldwork, we went to 8 different villages. So MT is the market town and is located here in the north of the island. Then we went to 4 different places that are on the coast, and that are closer to a road that directly connect them with the market town. Okay, so CR1 is the closest to the market town, and then CR2, CR3, and CR4 are further away. And then we also went to an island, which we call I1, and we went to, so the island is quite closer to the market town by boat. And then we went to 3 different villages in the mountains. So as you will see, it's so these places are very far away from the market town. So here are some photos from the market town. So this is the big market that takes place every day. So people in the market town sell fish, vegetables, fruit, coconuts, as you can see from these photos. Okay. Instead, the people who are in the village, they are connected, as I said, by what they call highway, by road. This is the road. So as you can see, the road is not very good in many places. In some places it is sealed, it has a tarmac like all the roads in the west, but only the first village, only CR1, has a direct connection by fast road connection with the market town. All the other villages otherwise have dirt road. The island can only be reached by boat. And then here you can see some scenes from the villages. You can see these are very, I would say, traditional ways of building houses with sago leaves. So these are my assistants shifting materials to the market town. This is me with an assistant and a person walking around this village. These are the people from this village. These are some nice sceneries from this island. Then the other coastal villages, you can see that these coastal villages use this type of boats to fish and to go around. So these are 2 women who collect seashells, and then they break seashells with a stone, and then they go. So here there is a market even in these coastal villages, but the markets are much less frequent. So a market can take place maybe only 2 days a week, only for a few hours. These are some houses in this village. And then there are the mountain villages. So the mountain villages were, some of the mountain villages were really high up, like maybe 400 to 500 meters above sea level. So we had to take a truck to go up, and then we had to walk for maybe 1.5 to 2 hours. In some cases we had to cross a river, as you can see here. So these are very disconnected places. So these are some local people carrying my suitcase. Big stream. So in order to wash, you have to go to the river and use the water from the river. And in order to cook food, you have to cut wood. So you have to collect wood, cut it, and then burn it. So here we used what we call lab in the field experiment. So people did the same experiment as we saw before. We used these places where people could make their decisions individually. So here we didn't have computers, so we only had real money. And here are some pictures when people come to collect their money at the end of the research. Okay, so here are some of the results. I think I need 10 more minutes and then I'll be finished. Okay, so first of all, you can see here on the vertical axis we have 2 different measures of what we call exposure to market. So the duration of travel, you have it on the vertical axis on the left-hand side. So you have how many minutes it takes to go to the market town. And so this is the blue line. So for the closest market town, it takes about 25 minutes. For people living in the island, it takes 30 minutes. And then you can see that people living in the mountain, it can take even 6 hours to get to the market town. And then the red line tells you how much money people have to spend to go to the market town. And you can see that quite obviously the closest you are, the less money you spend. Okay. And in particular, so here the people in the island spend more money than people in the coast because it's more expensive to travel by boat. But overall, there is a positive relationship between these two different measures. So I will skip this graph, and then the economic gain basically is as before. So people are assigned some money according to either a performance or a card game. Okay, so in the card game, they have to pick up a card, and if the card has a high number, then they receive a high amount of money. If the card is low, they receive a low amount of money. Or the performance treatment. In the merit treatment, people have to play a kind of basketball game. So if they are better than others, they receive a lot of money. If not, they receive little money. Okay, so in each situation, in each game, the rich person received 20 tokens and the poor person received 4 tokens. Okay, and then yes, so in each game there was what we call person 1 and person 2. So person 1 was the rich person and person 2 was the poor person initially. So overall there were 24 kina to redistribute between the rich and the poor. And the rich person 1 could choose to leave nothing to the poor person, or leave 2 kina. So the rich person could choose all the combinations, all the multiples of 2 kina up to 24 kina. So this person, so all the possible distribution were possible, from giving everything to the other person or giving nothing to the other person. And in particular, it was possible to split the money evenly, 12-12. Okay. And one of the two, and the poor person did exactly the same choice. So the poor person also could demand all the money, or could leave all the money to the other person. And then one of the two proposals would be randomly selected and implemented in the group. Okay, so here are the results. So the first hypothesis that we wanted to test is whether people are sensitive or not to individual merit. And the answer is no. And this was very surprising, because we saw that in Western societies, in particular in Italy and Germany, people were quite sensitive to individual merit. Instead, here, this is not the case. So here, ignore person 3. The game was a little bit more complicated. I didn't talk about person 3, but you can see that the behavior of person 1 and person 2 is the same when their money is determined by luck or by merit. So this is the first conclusion. And the second conclusion is that proximity to the market actually seems to matter. Okay, so here we have on the horizontal axis, we have the different villages, and they are ranked according to their proximity, to how close they are to the market town. Okay, so CR1 is the closest and the M3 is the furthest away. And on the vertical axis, you have the average demand, how much money you demand for yourself. So it's the opposite of redistribution. It's how much money you want for yourself. And here you can see that the two villages that are closest to the market town are those where people demand the most money for themselves. And the two villages that are furthest away from the market town are the two villages that demand the least for themselves. So there is a negative correlation that is statistically significant. And the same is the case for person 2. Here you can see that there is more variability for person 2. But again, the closest a village to the market town, the higher the demand demand of money, and vice versa. So here is a regression in which basically we show that this result is robust to many different controls that we can insert in the analysis. And finally, the last thing that I want to say is that there seems to be a lot of variability across villages, okay? A lot of variability. So now I don't have time to go into the details, but basically we can classify villages in 3 different groups. So in particular, in 2 villages, people are very, very selfish. So they demand a lot of money and they leave very little money to the other. In some villages, people are very egalitarians, so they like to share money evenly. And in some other villages, people accept inequality, and in particular, poor people are willing to leave a lot of money to rich people. So these are, again, the histograms coming from, in particular, one village, the island. So here you can see that there are many people, so the most chosen combination is really demanding a lot of money for oneself. So here on the horizontal axis, we have the money for the self. Okay, so here you can see that 81% of the rich people just demand 20 tokens or more. Okay, so many people, close to 30% of the people demand 24, so they leave nothing to the other. And here you can see this is even more the case for person 2, for the poor person. Okay, so these villages are characterized by very high levels of selfishness. So people demand a lot of money for themselves. So I will skip the other villages. But then in the other cluster, in cluster number 2, people are very egalitarian. So here you can see that the percentage of people who demand 20 kina or more is only 13%. 13% of rich people demand a lot. And you can see that the 50% of rich people just split evenly. Okay, and that is even more the case for person 2. So for person 2, more than 60% of the people demand sharing equally. Okay, so this is quite different behavior. And then finally, we have another type of behavior in the third cluster. So here we have that many poor people, so about 45% of poor people, leave more money to person 1, to the rich person. Okay, so this is a kind of acceptance of inequality by the poor people and acceptance that the rich people obtain more. Okay, so this is pretty much what I wanted to say. So what we learned from this research in Papua is that there is no reward of individual merit. So this maybe does not mean that people don't really reward individual merit, but it could mean that people attach a lot more importance to individual luck. Okay, so our interpretation is that if a person is lucky because a person draws a high card, then maybe they see this person as deserving to earn more, because maybe they see it as a kind of it's a sign of God. God wants this person to earn a lot of money. So for them, luck and merit has the same value. And then we could also see that the village level exposure to market is associated with greater inequality acceptance. So the closer people are to the market town, the higher the acceptance of inequality. And we also observe that there is a great variability across villages. Okay, so this suggests that the social norms have a lot of importance. Okay, so I think I can stop here. Maybe I will talk about this last slide, interpretation of these results in Papua, in the discussion that is going to take place now. And so, yes, my presentation is finished now, so we can now go to some questions, if you have some questions. So I think the technician now can use my laptop to go back to live stream. Okay, so I will wait now for the questions.
Bias is like, because essentially they're like asking for.
Just a moment, Jam.
Okay.
Our participants are formulating their questions.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I will wait for participants formulating questions.
Just like, what do you think? What is the influence of being like biased in this experiment? Because essentially you're asking poor people to kind of act as rich people, if I understand it right. So what is the influence for those people? Is it like, how can you, like in a real world, in a real situation?
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, I think it's yeah. So the question is clear. So I think this situation, so this experiment is what happens in real life when, I don't know, you have two different political parties. So one political party is left-wing, so this political party normally will want more redistribution to the poor, and the other political party is right-wing, and this political party want less redistribution to the poor. So this is clearly the case, for instance, in the US. So the Republicans want less taxes, and the Democrats want more taxes. In Europe, many parties, political parties like socialist parties, they would want more redistribution, and other parties like liberal parties, they want less redistribution. So in a way, what we are asking people is to vote for one political party or another political party. So here we imagine, so of course in our game there is no political party, it's just a direct redistribution. So I think you can see it in this way. So it is true. It is true. It is as if the rich in principle can take all the money from the rich and divide it to the poor. So this is of course very, very extreme. This is very extreme. In real life, this does not happen, of course, unless there is a revolution where really the money of the rich people is really taken entirely away from them. But, this is, I think, important for economic theory, because in experiment we can do things that we cannot do in real life. So in real life there is for sure a limit that the limit over how much money we can take from the rich to the poor. Okay, so in the experiment we can create this situation in which there is no limit, so we can really see what is the preference for redistribution. So if people are given the possibility, would poor people taking all the money from the rich to redistribute to the poor or not? So we can really see in economic theory, we call these social preferences. So we can really see whether these social preferences are limited or they go to the whole scale. They go up to really 100% redistribution. So I would say it is actually interesting that this situation is not entirely realistic, because then we can really study individual preferences in a way that is important for economic theory as well. I hope I've been clear. I'm waiting to see if there are other questions. I can see probably some more questions will come. Okay, so I can see the photo.
John, thank you very much for your speech. Really, that people are a little bit maybe confused, maybe tired. Well, thank you, John. I think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, and yes, I hope that you at least got the gist of my presentation and of the methods that we use. And if you have other questions for the future, feel free to email me or stay in touch with me. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye bye. До свидания.